Hello, dear hearts. Marilyn here with another part of Wisdom's Way of Learning. This is going to be a very inspiring message for you. You're going to understand, grasp, and be able to run with this renewing of your mind toward a whole life education. And so what we're going to be talking about is, we're going to be untangling some more fleshly ideas, and in doing so, you're going to discover if you have been playing make-believe like a child by providing a show of learning in your family. And this is just going to be a fun message. You're going to thoroughly enjoy it. I'm going to talk about Wisdom's Way of Learning, the book. I actually only have one copy of the original volume left, and that's it right there. It was a really thick book. It was, 300 pages, full-size pages, and that was the original publication back in 1994. It debuted at the Texas State Convention. I had been invited to as a featured speaker to that convention when we were living in Washington, and the book was just getting ready to be finished and published, and it made it just in time. The first printing was 100 copies, and we sold out at that convention, every copy. Shortly after that, the Elijah Company picked it up and featured a 2-page spread. Actually, it was 4 pages, but 2 pages just about Wisdom's Way of Learning, and then another couple pages just talking about natural learning. And because of that feature article about Wisdom's Way of Learning, Elijah Company began selling thousands of copies for us. And eventually I decided to break up the book because it was so big and heavy, and I wanted it easier for moms to handle and to read. And so I broke it up into a 4-book set, and we did this shrink wrapping thing, on the set. So I'm going to show you what they looked like individually. This is the first book, The Science, Art, and Tools of Learning, that we're going through right now. And then the Unit of Life Learning Model, the Life Message Learning Model, and the Seasons, God's Time Design. And as you know, my daughter drew all of these collage pictures on the covers. Also included in the original volume was my journey in search for the way, and this is my own story of how God arrested my attention and opened my eyes to see many things. And it's a very it actually follows a theme of the wilderness, children of Israel in the wilderness, and so it follows my story along the different happenings of being in the wilderness. And then Catherine's bird book and John's record of projects, my daughter and my son. And so these were in the original volume of Wisdom's Way of Learning, demonstrating the model, the actual unit of life learning model, demonstrating that model. And so they were a very detailed explanations of what I had my children do. Now, these are all available in digital format on the website as part, they're not not part of the Wisdom's Way of Learning set anymore. They sell individually, and honestly, I don't remember what they go for. But the original, the large volume I showed you, was $39. And then the set, when I reduced it down, we brought the price down to $29. And these smaller ones were $7 a piece. We never actually sold this set separately. They came in a set, and that was it. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a little history of that, and so that you could explore the possibility of getting the other pieces to that book, which made it a lot easier for moms with nursing babies and always holding children and things like that. You know, it's just easier for them to manage it. So I thought it would be fun for you to hear that. And so that's how we sold Wisdom's Way from probably 96. Let me think. 95 to 96 is when I broke that up. I'm not sure exactly when. And sold thousands of copies of it. Then other publications, catalogs picked it up. We had multiple wholesale sales of the book to homeschool catalogs that carried it. Probably a dozen of them. All the major ones carried the book. And they also carried, Elijah Company carried Catherine's book, To Adventures with Nature. They requested that specifically, and we sold hundreds of this little book through Elijah Company. Well, anyway, so aside from that, we sold our own books at our lifestyle learning conferences. We had book tables, and that's where we sold our products, and in addition to what the book companies, the curriculum providers sold. Anyway, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background, because the books are, they're old, but the principles are living and still work because it's truth, it's truth. And so they're rich with the possibility of inspiration for you. We didn't have any problems selling it at those prices, because back then the homeschool providers were self-publishers. We're all self-publishing, and a lot of people began self-publishing. We weren't the only ones, and self-publishing is a very costly endeavor. At least back then it was. I know that it's not so much now because of Amazon, how easy it is for people to do things. But we had our own print shop, and it was a lot of work. It was actually quite labor intensive. All of these books, my husband and my son put together. In addition to all the newsletters and the journals. Eventually we had the journal done. We had the journal printed on a web press, so that it was, because it needed to be more mass produced for our subscriber list. But we made every single copy of these books ourselves. I did all the formatting in addition to the writing, and then Jim figured out some of the design of the cover, and Catherine did all of the artwork for me. And in addition to the artwork in all the journals, the covers of the journals, it was a family effort. And eventually Catherine and John had feature articles or pieces in the journals. They both did some writing for the journal. And just to bring more for the children's corner, for the youth, because we had an insert that was just for the children, so that the whole family could enjoy getting the Lifestyle Learning Journal. So anyway, it was a family affair for a very long time. Actually, for 15 years, we published the journal, and various newsletters as well. So It was a lot of work, and honestly, we were relieved when we had to shut it down because it took every moment of our lives and for a very long time. And I ended up losing my health, and it had nothing to do with that, but we ended up just needing to shut it down, and it was just a blessing in disguise. I mean, we were sad about it at the time because it was actually our livelihood. That was how we made a living, and it wasn't a great living, but it was what we had. Just trying to serve the Lord and provide a message to God's people, so who were interested in a spirit-guided natural learning process with wisdom. So anyway, that's about all. I could talk about that forever. I've got so many stories that I could share with you. And so I'm going to get going on this. This is going to be very interesting for you. I think you're going to really enjoy it. And now we have been referring to different chapters in Wisdom's Way, and because I know that you can just read that, you don't need to hear me read it all over again. I am actually skipping the structure until toward the end. I'm reorganizing this material as if I was writing an updated version of Wisdom's Way. I'm going to take the structure I created from the theory and put it toward the end of this series. And so what I'm wanting to do is get into the heart of the learning process with you. And you may read that chapter on page 64, and it talks about the qualities of a true learning process. And then you can go into 7 natural vital signs and describing all of that. And so that's page 64 all the way through page 92. And this particular section is right in the middle of the book. This section of the book actually has, I actually have very expanded messages on each of the vital signs. And I don't know if or when I'll be able to do that on this series. I might be able to do a second series just on the vital signs. But in the meantime, I do want to introduce them to you and go from there, because I want you to see something that I'm going to be showing you through this other message having to do with chopping through the tangle of false and fleshly ways to expose the childish play of make-believe. It's what we're going to talk about. But before we do, I want to tell you a little bit about this group of learning indicators that I named the 7 vital signs of the learning process. And these actually can reveal the fruit of your labors to bring learning to your children. And so these vital signs, I'm hoping, will open your eyes to truly see your children. So here's just a brief definition of each one for you. Individuality, and we touched on the principle of individuality in the last part of this series, and today we're going to go into it quite a bit more. Individuality means distinct, unique, one of a kind, no two of any kind or alike. And it's this facet of human nature that defines a unique purpose, along with the distinct preparation by which it is achieved. I know that's very brief. We're going to be talking about individuality quite a bit today. Delight directed means to be directed with a high degree of pleasure over a substantial period of time. And the pleasure is more of a permanent nature instead of a short burst of interest, you see? And so it's a good thing to examine your children's activities and see what exactly they have a high degree of pleasure toward that is sustained over a long period of time, because it has more of a permanent nature to it instead of just a short burst of interest. Life related means to have some connection to real life, and it's about current real needs of growth. Remember, real, related, life related, real needs of growth and development, and actual curiosities toward learning and a need to know something. And so we're talking about a child's in real time actual curiosity towards something, toward learning, toward life. So that momentary curiosity is something that's happening in real time. So it's related to your life. Do you see that? Life related. And so when children are curious to know something, you have an opportunity to capitalize on that curiosity or that interest, because it's related to what is going on in their world. It's life related. Now remember, this principle, or this vital sign, stems from the principle of relationship. Relationship is central to life, and everything flows out of the quality of how people relate with one another, within themselves, and with their world. Okay, so life related is very, very important. It's just not about a child's curiosity about something. It's the mode of interaction between your child and that something. How is he relating with it? You see, how he's relating with his siblings, how he's relating with you, how he's relating within himself, okay? So there's way more that can be said about this, but this is a vital sign of the learning process. Valuably active means to be energetic in useful purpose, or you could say energetic in a beneficial and significant purpose. And that's why I didn't just say active, I qualified that with valuably active, because that means it's beneficial and significant in purpose for doing a thing, or in having an interest in a thing. Then productive means to bring into existence something tangible and useful through a well-defined process that gradually moves forward toward the desired result, kind of like seed sowing. So something that is productive in nature actually gradually moves forward, kind of like when we talked about the process and the product in the first part of this series. That was the first video on Wisdom's Way of Learning. Productive stems from that idea, the principle of process and product. So you've got a well-defined process that gradually moves forward toward a desired result. And you can hold up this vital sign like a little light over your children's activities. Are they being productive? Self-motivated, and that means with an inner drive to connect with an interpersonal need, or connect with an interpersonal want or desire, and having the ability to drive it forward without the need for outward compulsion, meaning without the need of a parent making them do it. You see, that is self-motivation. And of course, that is a part of what we call self-government, the ability to control, regulate, restrain your own life and move it forward, right? And direct, so there's control, direction, regulation, and restraint. There's 4 parts to self-government. Focused means with a central point of concentration. So it's the center of activity, or the attention that develops vision for purpose. And so when a child is very focused on a particular activity, they are in deep concentration, and that the center of that activity, or the attention to it, paying attention to it, actually helps to develop vision within them for further purpose with that particular activity, or with another one that is inspired while they're doing that activity, you see? So as you can see by the definitions, each one of the vital signs have their own unique characteristics that indicate learning is underway, but they are also closely related to one another. They'll work in concert with each other to produce good fruit, consistent with a whole life education, when your children are given the heart level attention that they need. They need to be happy, and happy children love to learn. So now individuality takes the lead of all 7 of these. It's in the lead, and the other 6 actually support the formation of true individuality. So when you allow for the individual heartbeat of your children as you get to know them, you can apply the ideas of the vital signs in life-giving ways. They will help you to see what is needed, what's missing, and encourage you about the good things that your children are up to these days. So you, as a wise, caring mother, will learn how to figuratively hold these vital signs up as little lights over every learning activity and experience that they are having at the moment, to help you identify what kind of fruit is being produced in your children's character, and to help you discern current needs so you can wisely direct your children's learning process. So as your children discover who they are and what they are drawn to explore, they will release their unique inborn creativity. And then through the lens of these vital signs, you'll be able to see that they are engaged in skill building and many creative, unique, personal, and individual applications of the learning tools on their chosen subjects of interest, and even some that you choose for them. And then their learning processes will be true and vital, serving to form many practical abilities in them, but also forming character and personal identity and purpose as well. I just have to tell you something funny that happened the other day. Little Jack, he's going to be 5 next week. And he's a crafty person. He's creating things all the time. And he came down just a little bit upset the other day. And he said, I asked Mommy to make me a Venus flytrap, and she said no. What he was wanting was a Venus flytrap costume. And he goes on to explain exactly, and you just have to do this and this and this, and he outlined probably 5 or 6 steps just like that of how you make a Venus flytrap. And he went, it's easy. He didn't understand why Mommy couldn't whip up a costume out of fabric of a Venus flytrap. And he ran upstairs to get his Venus flytrap that he had just got through making, brought it down. It's about that tall, you know, the big trap thing. And he made cardboard covered with paper so it would be stiff and it would hold up. And he's telling me the steps exactly in the order of how to make it. And he just couldn't understand how Mommy couldn't make a fabric costume Venus flytrap. He just said, it's easy. I got the biggest kick out of that. Anyway, it was cute. Very crafty. And he always envisions what he wants to make. And he knows exactly what he needs. And he knows exactly what steps it will take to make it. Very productive. And a little focused as well. And I would say delight directed and all kinds of other. I think all of the vital signs show up right there. He and Irene's boys, John Irene's boys, they are extremely crafty. And so when they're all over at the house here at my table, they're getting into all the craft supplies that I keep for them. And they're just making things up constantly. Paper folding, cutting, getting the clay and making stands for things and toothpicks and just anything I have to get their hands on to they just imagine, oh, let's make an eagle and then let's make it stand up or, you know, whatever it is. And they're just making things, or they fold paper kind of like origami and make things out of folded paper, you know, just making things. Very productive. All right, so now what I'm going to do is get into this message about make-believe. And I think you're going to learn so much from this, ladies. So stay with me. This is going to be very inspiring for you. Well, it's really important that they're able to do those sorts of things, you know, just the craftiness, the being able to create and envision. When they're doing it with crafts, later on it will be something bigger, you know, they'll just keep growing their vision based on their capacity for doing more. All right. Well, many moms over the years have tried to put into words what my ministry message had done for them. And one mom told me that I compelled her to come out of the box of tradition and into a new life of grace. And another said that I took the pieces of her life that were put together all wrong and I shook them up like a jigsaw puzzle in a box and dumped them out onto the floor. I'll never forget her telling me that. She was very disconcerted. Another colorful expression that I heard from a mom is that I helped her to chop through the tangle of false cultural and fleshly ways. And so I invite you to come along with me as I chop through some fleshly tangle that erects a roadblock to receiving the relational wisdom of God for your family's whole life education. And in this message, I'll be exposing the childish play of make-believe. So in the previous message, I presented the concept of simple ideas being the challenge that we face when applying God's complex truths. Now, it sounds simple enough. Don't the vital signs sound simple enough? Yeah, until you actually try to examine your life or your children's lives. It sounds simple that we need to consider the role individuality plays in our children's educational process and to learn how to support the formation of individuality using these vital signs of learning as our guide. However, we usually give what seems like good and simple ideas only token and surface attention, as we quickly find that there is no easy way to carry them out because it requires the application of what? Relational wisdom. It's always got to come back to that. And for the lack of relational wisdom, we find ourselves instead exercising extreme ideas born out of our own simple ways that we can understand that are clearly spelled out. Don't we want those? So let's now explore the concept of simple ideas a little more, because the way we expect simple solutions to life's challenges influences how we approach truth as it's played out in our relationship with God and how we direct our children. Now understand this. The way we expect simple solutions to our homeschooling challenges, it actually influences how we approach truth in our relationship with God as well, and how we direct our children. So we often end up with fruit different from what we were hoping for, and this is perplexing to us. So I'm going to expand on the insights of C.S. Lewis here. He said that spiritual truths are, quote, his statement, God's statement to us of certain quite unalterable facts about his own nature. It's like individuality. It's part of God's own nature. He wants us forming individuality in our children. You see? So I want to show you how we subconsciously reject God and his ways with this little discussion of the first vital sign, the principle of individuality. So look with me at the universe as Lewis described it. He's talking about the universe here. Quote, when you have grasped that the Earth and other planets all go round the sun, you would naturally expect that all the planets were made to match, all at equal distance from each other, say, or distances that regularly increased, or all the same size. They're all very different. So reality is, in fact, usually something you could not have guessed. So I'd like you to remember my emphasized part of this statement. Reality is something that you could not have guessed. Remember this, because I'll be reminding you of it later in this message. When I was considering the principle of individuality, now remember what I talked about last time. I thought it was about how things looked. And I thought about how we humans have a tendency to like things that match, or to have our ducks in a row, so to speak. Uniformity is somehow comforting to us because it's predictable in our ever-changing surroundings and circumstances, and it can also be a bit of fun. And so I'm reminded of my childhood when my mom made all of our clothes, and I'm the oldest of 7 with an identical twin besides, and my mom lovingly made all of the family's shirts and blouses out of the same fabric. She would buy a whole bolt of fabric, and she'd made all of our clothes, even my dad's work clothes and her own work clothes eventually, and many of our pants and dresses. So my siblings and I had many look-alike outfits, and my twin sister and I dressed alike most of our school years until we were probably juniors and seniors in high school. We even had fun in high school, sometimes playing practical jokes on our friends and even on our teachers, switching classes at times. So I'm going to just show you a couple of pictures just to add some interest to this. This one is this is probably an Easter outfits that my mom made, and we're all dressed up ready for church on that one. And honestly, I don't know which one's which. So this one's me. I have to take a look at it. Let me see which one's this one. And this one we're in play clothes, and I can't actually tell who's who on this one. It's just it's too small to tell, but there we have our play clothes on. And this one is our uniform. This would have been a spring uniform. And so it's just with a sweater. And I think on this one right here. And this is as infants. And let me see. Kind of hard to tell, but I think I'm on the right here. This one. And there we are. Anyway, that's 1951. Oh, and this is high school. And I'm this one here. So, just a few, to let you know, it really happened. My mom made all of our clothes. I have other pictures where it shows the entire family, 9 of us, dressed with the very same blouse and shirt on. Boys shirts, girls blouses, but same fabric. Well, growing up a twin, I came to realize what people were actually mostly interested in. They're curious about the likenesses, but what they were really wanting to see were the differences. Go figure. People always compared my sisters and my differences. And so we humans are made in the image of God. And so naturally we look for differences, individual traits, unique personality qualities, perhaps not even realizing that we're doing this. And yet how often we deny those very same traits in how we are raising, training, and educating our own children. You see this? I'm going to help you to see it more clearly. Now, I enjoy having fun with playing lookalikes as much as anyone. I've always held a fun dream in my heart that one day my mom and all the other female members of my family would get together for a special lunch wearing purple outfits and red hats. For no other reason but to celebrate family. And I once saw a group of 6 women in a restaurant who were doing that, and they appeared to be of 3 generations of family, and they were having so much fun. And these are small ways of maintaining family identity, in a sense, making a statement of who you are, that you belong together. It's similar to wearing a uniform that identifies you with a particular team or group. And in my case, I was raised in going to parochial schools, and so we wore uniforms my whole childhood, and we changed into play clothes that my mom made when we got home from school, and we got dressed up for church, always dressed up, and we got dressed up to go shopping, we always dressed up. And so we had a really wonderful wardrobe of clothes that my mom made, and many that just we dressed alike, my sister and I did. Sometimes there's an apparent underlying religious motivation toward this type of conformity that somehow either subconsciously or intentionally disallows true individuality from coming forth and blossoming. And I experienced this, or I should say I witnessed this regularly in the homeschool community back in the 80s and 90s when homeschooling was new. There was a lot of legalism in the leadership and how they were leading the homeschoolers to think and believe and look, and the ideas they were leading the homeschool parents to embrace. It was just tons of legalism. And so it was very regular to see families that were dressed alike. And so then on this path of conformity, which that is what that is conformity, will fail to actually apprehend God's life because we have to deny that he's speaking to our conscience. And so we will circumvent it at every turn to express our own ways. And we can't possibly know him when we are rejecting who he is. We're actually rejecting the principle of individuality and what that's supposed to look like, how it's supposed to be expressed in our lives in all of its areas. And because we push God out, we live in fear and the need to control, because people feel comforted in maintaining control and appearance of order. And that's what conformity does. It gives you an appearance of order in your otherwise chaotic world and circumstances. And so we impose our own ideas for what a truth should look like. So this is a simple solution for simple ideas. And so then our sin nature predisposes us to oppose truth and reality, because we are choosing instead to impose our own ideas for what a truth should look like on our circumstances, creating a simple solution for a simple idea. And so we're literally pushing God out. And I'm sure you'd agree that a casual approach to the idea of dressing alike would not prevent us from walking in Christ's life and grace. Uniformity has a way of teasing us into believing that there's more order to our world than we actually have, right? But our tendency to resist truth is quite subtle and usually comes wrapped in the guise of living righteously. And our resistance to truth shows up across the whole spectrum of life. And so I'm going to take this concept, usually comes wrapped in the guise of living righteously. Back in the early homeschool years, when there was a lot of legalistic influence among homeschoolers, the way they resisted truth, it was subtle, but it was everywhere, because there was a form of righteousness. They would come up with their own ideas for what family life was supposed to look like, pushing God out of it. So children were supposed to be quiet, and girls weren't supposed to get educated. Girls were always supposed to wear dresses, and so that it goes on and on and on. There were lots of rules. And then as the kids get older, then they have the rules for how to relate with the opposite sex, and don't even make eye contact with them, and things like that. You couldn't just have friends and have an easy, natural engagements with and encounters and exchanges, I should call it exchanges, with other people. There were always so many imposed rules on every dynamic, regular life dynamic. And so making it extremely awkward and foreign and unnatural. And that was supposed to make the parents feel like they were doing the right thing. They were righteous, right? So here's another example. Do you want to homeschool like the other moms or provide extra activities for your kids because your best friend is doing it? What is your motivation for homeschooling? Perhaps you've been on a search for something that works for you when following other people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But have you ever thought that if this desire is allowed to be taken to an extreme, can actually indicate a resistance to God's own nature? After all, if you're not turning to Him for the answers, perhaps there is an underlying opposition to truth and resistance to His work in your life. Do you believe that He has a unique purpose for you in your life? That's individuality, a unique purpose. You are made for a unique purpose. If you found yourself wondering about these words that I'm speaking to you, let me show you how it doesn't end there. Our sin nature predisposes us to resist and oppose truth and reality. And we've all done it. We resist the truths of the gospel that require us to relate honestly with others, like the acts of truth-telling repentance and forgiveness. I'm amazed at how many times I meet a Christian who's never actually sought forgiveness from anyone before, or received forgiveness from the Lord for their own sins, and yet they call themselves a Christian. So we resist the body of truths of how God provides education and how God provides discipleship through tending to our relationships at the heart level. We disciple and we educate completely outside of any heart level relational context. Do you see that? Opposing what can be a transformative truth for our lives. So here's just one example of what I mean. Do you create a false reality, a programmed curriculum for teaching toward a broad knowledge base to disciple your children or to prepare them for a future unknown reality, thinking they may need it sometime? Do you do that? Parents do this all the time in the name of education and discipleship, not knowing they are completely removing the relational factor out of the process. Whereas all areas of development should be submitted to an inner relational growth process, a need to know basis. Very different from they may need it sometime. Wise relational dynamics should actually go out to surround and consume every single aspect of the processes of education and discipleship, where hearts are touched and love and influence flow both ways, true needs are met, wisdom and understanding grow, and Christ-like character is formed at the heart level. So God created life to work right out of such a rich, life-giving context. So I'm going to say that one thing again. Wise relational dynamics in your family should go out to surround and consume every single aspect of the processes of education and discipleship. Remember that life-related vital sign? That's part of it. Life-related. You could hold that up, Mom, over everything that you're having your children do. Is it something they may need sometime, or do they need it now? Right? God created life to work right out of out of his life-giving context. So you can't simply take the sum of a person's life and all of their relational circumstances and submit it to a preset order of steps that somebody else made up for you and box it up into a tidy curriculum package, hoping that everything will turn out right for you if you just follow the instructions. You simply can't program life. You can't program your children. You cannot program them. So, dear Mom, if you are a believer in Christ, you can't create a false reality in which to program your children toward what you want for their spiritual growth. So much of our human nature actually wants life to be just this simple. Our human nature, our puny little small capacities for understanding truth, our small capacities for making life work, that human nature I'm describing actually wants life to be just that simple. We want programs. We want to program. And we want conformity. We want to believe that the activity of educating and discipling is as simple as constraining our children so we can only inform their intellects with a particular batch of knowledge about God and easily turn our focus to content-based methods and programs, not realizing that God has a better idea than we do. God has a better idea, and it's relational. It's relationally based. And see, programmatic discipleship and education is not relationally based. So in desiring simple solutions, We oppose truth, what God stands for, and how he chooses to work in our lives to provide education and discipleship. And so the reality of how the Lord works is much more complex than our human understanding, because God is complex, is he not? His creation is complex. People are complex. The circumstances of your family unit are also complex, and they will dictate the process and the outcome of your family's education. So your family possesses its own challenges and human raw material that gives it a unique identity. Remember, unique, individuality, unique, distinct, one of a kind. Well, that's your own challenges are unique, distinct, one of a kind as well. And therefore, unique needs that also require what? Unique answers from the Lord. Life and true education is not as simple as opening a box of curriculum and plopping your children down, expecting them to grow and change as they try to meet your unreasonable expectations. Are you following me? This false effort will actually backfire on you toward a loss of their personal identity and purpose. But you can stop it right now before you go too long down this path. It's an unfruitful path. So I showed you, I described the 7 vital sign indicators to you, and eventually we're going to go into talking about the learning tools, the 5 learning tools, so you can re-educate your mind and receive inspiration for a new and exciting, life-giving way. What is it you're wanting to train your children in? Relational processes. How to connect within themselves, how to connect with each other, how to connect with you, how to connect with God, how to connect with their world, how to connect with their interests, and everything that's going on in their circumstances. How to connect. You want their mode of operation and exchange to be healthy. And healthy children love to learn. And so you're wanting them to know how to learn. You're wanting them to love to learn, and you're wanting them to know how to learn. And that's why we focus on developing the 5 learning tools. And that if we understand what real learning looks like through the vital sign indicators, and we are leading our children to use the learning tools in everyday life as much as possible, we have a rich and full whole life education going on. So you've been learning how you can encounter roadblocks or stumbling blocks when you try to apply relational truths, because many problems come from living according to our flesh instead of according to our spirit. And so for you to really benefit from this Wisdom's Way of Learning series, I thought it important to expose some of the roadblocks or stumbling blocks that you're facing. And that's what I've been discussing mostly up until now, because these roadblocks are usually erected by the opposing ways of our own flesh, our own efforts, our own ways. In the flesh, we twist and we pervert our understanding of what God's wonderful truth should look like in our life. And so depending on which opposing way of flesh that you think serves your purposes the best. Now, everybody does this. You may follow either a religious rival in your leanings toward a legalistic expression of a truth, or you'll follow a cultural counterfeit in your leanings toward a licentious expression. Now, remember what we talked about with individuality in the last message, that there was an opposing rival called conformism, and the counterfeit, cultural counterfeit that's licentious, called individualism. Remember? But individuality is unique, one of a kind, and it can only be formed in the context of a healthy community that submits to one another in love. You see? So these opposing ways of the flesh can be seen in the lives of average believers everywhere. And to be honest with you, I really want to strike conviction in your heart so you can turn from your false ways and into God's wisdom and grace. Many of your own problems may come from the possibility that you and your family are still living according to your flesh. And I know that's a hard statement, but taking a quick survey of the quality of your family relationships will probably tell what's been going on. Because our relational fruit tells on us when we've kept our heart detached from the work that God wants to do there, to expose our self-centered, unholy ways and bring us into his wisdom and grace. You see, with the absence of grace and God's wisdom operating, you know what you have? You have parents who are controlling. Or you have parents who are licentious and permissive. You see? And children balk at the controlling, they resist it, and they become undisciplined and licentious in their life with the individualism, you see, without the parental discipline that's coming through the lens of grace and the Spirit and love. So you may be able to relate with some of my personal stories and examples, but if you don't, you'll be inspired as I illustrate with many of my kids' wonderful learning activities and the processes that caused their growth. And I really just want to see you empowered toward a wise application of the vital signs that will grow all the fruit that you desire. And the Holy Spirit will be with you to provide wisdom through his personal correction and instruction to your heart. So let's talk more about the make-believe. I'm going to go back to C.S. Lewis. His conclusion on the theme of individuality is this, that if Christianity offered us just what one would expect, conformity and uniformity, then we could very well be making it all up. And I think he's right about that. And after hearing this message thus far, can you agree? If Christianity offered us what we would expect, conformity and uniformity, as in everybody being educated the very same way through curriculum, lifeless curriculum, same way with discipleship in the church. You just go through this program and that program and you're discipled, educating the intellect. If Christianity truly offered what we expected, then we could be very well making it all up. In other words, if Christianity offered us just what we might have guessed, the uniformity of the planets, all aligned with each other, the way that we can understand, right? Twins dressing alike, a large family having look-alike clothes, right? Right? Everything clearly spelled out like a curriculum package does for us, then we could very well be like children playing make-believe, playing house, playing church, playing school. And this is evidently true. If you don't have any real life that flows out of the love and relational wisdom of God's work in your own heart and in your family relationships, by necessity you have to make one up. Because relational wisdom and relational wholeness give you the character and capacity for education and discipleship that you didn't have before. And so you have to make it up for lack of that. You see? So I'm going to do a little more chopping at life's tangle of fleshly ways while I illustrate from my own life when I was a homeschooling mom. And you may be able to relate with how I sabotaged my own efforts toward forming individuality in my children. Now, I did share a little bit of this with you in the last message, but here's an expanded version of it. I take it a little bit farther so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about with a show of learning. And this is my story about a need I had to provide a show of learning. So when I didn't understand how God grows an individual from the inside out. Now, if you haven't heard the last message, go back and listen to that so that you can track with me on this one. I try to overlap it a little bit so they stand alone. But when I didn't understand how God grows an individual from the inside out, I just had to neglect the inside, what many of you have had to do. And then I try to put knowledge from the outside into the container of my children's minds, hoping to influence them somehow. Now, with this focus, as I encountered an idea that seemed vital to me, like the principle of individuality was, I would still attempt, even though I was a serious Christian, to rival God's true expression of individuality, to rival it with my own made-up version of a model I could understand. A simple idea to a complex principle. You see? So do you remember how I tried to teach information to my children about individuality as though this somehow would make them into individuals? I had a friend who did the same thing with the principle of self-government, trying to present the principle of self-government to his children by making a poster, putting it on the wall, and giving the definition and explaining self-government, and then leaving it there, thinking that somehow now they were going to become self-governed. You see? I acted with independent control, with little accountability of my own, pretending to be acting on a truth, and just like my friend had done. But I formed my own idea to serve my immature need to provide a show of learning, because there I am making a curriculum to instruct my children's minds about the principle of individuality, hoping, and this is a ridiculous idea, but this is a simple, a very simple show of learning for a complex idea, hoping that my children were now going to grow into individuality. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but I bet you can look at everything you've done and you will find examples of doing the very same thing to your children that I did to mine. I shaped my efforts into a rigid, distorted image of the real thing by perverting the application of what was supposed to be life-giving truths that I thought supported the formation of individuality in my children. Now, at that time, I was unaware of this inward activity of my efforts. I was still in control, even though I had been yielding up pieces of my life to follow Christ. And so I was obeying him to the best of my understanding and knowledge at the time. Now, while my effort had no hope of forming true individuality in my children because it wasn't relational, God continued to work through my relationship with him to lead me out of my own ways and come to rely more heavily on his wisdom. And then I would be equipped to relate with my children's hearts right here. Now, by the way, I had approached many truths this way in my flesh during my early years of homeschooling while trying to get truth to my children. I did the same thing with self-government that my friend did, only I did a whole curriculum. I wrote a whole curriculum to teach my children self-government. So I'm grateful that God showed me a much more powerful way. Back in the day when I was going to homeschool state convention, now I'm talking about late 80s, there were curriculum providers coming up with curriculum to teach your children character. And I bought one thinking, oh, good, I'm going to teach my children character. Oh, that's not how you teach character. But at the time, I didn't know. I did not know. And so there I had a curriculum to teach my children character. So I had this simple idea for something that is way more complex, that needs to be relational. You see, you can't teach curriculum through, you can't teach character through a curriculum any more than you can teach self-government or individuality through a curriculum. You can't make an informational transfer of knowledge from your mind to your children's mind for things that require inner growth processes to engage them in for the growth of those matters. You see, I'm really grateful God showed me a much more powerful way. You see, as I created my made-up version of truth, my oversimplified version of how reality works, you see, thinking that you could teach children individuality or self-government or character through a curriculum, that's an oversimplified version of how the reality of those processes actually work. Are you following me? I couldn't actually allow for any true individuality, any true character from forming, any true self-government from happening. You see, isn't that just perplexing? If I allowed for true individuality, I would be allowing for what? A competition with my oversimplified version of how individuality works. Instead, and this competition is like the counterfeit, the cultural counterfeit of what God's way actually is. So instead, I expected my children to conform externally to my learning model, my content, my methods for delivering it, and my exercises and my assignments, successfully stifling any real individuality from ever showing up. Can you see it? Instead of nurturing the unique, God-given, creative profile of my children, which would form true individuality in them, I provided a different course altogether that was driven by my need to provide a show of learning. Do you see that? Just like school. But it fell far short of the mark of God's generous wisdom in His Spirit. Now, this legalistic effort was a work of the flesh, but I had to pretend, plain what? Plain school, to be doing the real work of God. I was pretending to do the real work of God. I actually had landed on truth finally, but I still was using fleshly models for how to get truth to my children. You see? Man-made models. I was producing a rival work or counterfeit work that wars against God's life-giving ways and produces relational death. I was fashioning God in my own image, making up what God wants, making up a false standard for the way to live it out, or to transfer that truth to my children intellectually. And this rival fruit took on the shape of conformity, which includes uniformity. You see, so I came to see that His ways of working are not at all as simple as I supposed. To apprehend truth and wisdom, I had to continue to form my spirituality in Christ, not just in the knowledge of Christ, but as I opened my heart wide, allowing God to work in my heart to let go of my own ideas towards simple solutions for complex processes. He corrected and he instructed me in so many practical matters. He gave me understanding about his ways of wisdom toward the formation of Christ-like character in myself and my children. It leads to a whole life education. And there came a time shortly after that season when I finally quit sabotaging my own efforts to do good for my children. I had done it so many times, and I'm so grateful that God in his mercy rescued me and taught me how to hold my children's hearts so I could easily, wisely nurture who they were and guide their education with the Holy Spirit's influence. So one day, I had done the individuality through a curriculum. I had transferred knowledge to my children's minds that way, and then I went on to do self-government through a curriculum. One day, my daughter got my attention with something she said. She was on her way out the door with her brother for a break from table time work, and we'd been studying self-government for quite a while. And she said, "Don't worry, Mom, we'll be self-governed." And I thought, all I really need to do is train them in real time. Now that I grasped the principles, all I needed to do was actually train them in real time through their play, through their conduct, through the exchanges that they made between each other on a daily basis. I could teach them the control, direction, regulation, restraint. Take those principles and apply them to real life situations. And you know what I did that day? I chucked the curriculum and I came into real life and I began applying truth to the real life activities, situations, and encounters and exchanges and circumstances of the day. Real life. And so I engaged my children in the complex processes of growth and change toward a whole life education. Are you following me? Do you know how freeing that is? Teaching them how to relate within themselves and with each other. Oh, it was so freeing and so rich, so deep and meaningful, and so much more productive than what I had been doing. I'd been wasting so much time and effort on curriculum. Oh my goodness. Now I'm going to go into the opposite extreme of the flesh, and because this is what the flesh does, is it swings to the opposite extreme, back and forth, trying to find the place to land, not understanding that spirit and grace is above that. If you don't like the tight controls that you see among your homeschooling circles, or if you've realized that your own ideas didn't work right when you were trying to have tight controls, you might swing to the opposite course in your efforts toward individuality. Now your conformance mindset has produced an opposite bad fruit, individualism. And just like before, you still act with independence, but instead of so much control, you exercise more license and create a model that is less regulated, but still an expression of your flesh. And this is the counterfeit version of God's wonderful truth that tries to look like the truth but falls far short of it. So in my own story, I never actually swung to the opposite approach of license, because I had come out of that when I began to homeschool and was never tempted to go back into license. What I wanted was wisdom. I wanted relational wisdom in God's grace and love. I wanted substance in my family relationships. I wanted substance in my children's education. I wanted reality. So I wasn't tempted to swing into license, but I've known many moms who have lived in license. So the Lord had my heart and was guiding me in my process of experimenting with education. He was faithful to bring me into his ways of grace that didn't neglect what was important and vital to life. However, our oldest child was educated in schools, and what I witnessed unfolding in him as he went through adolescence is much like what many homeschoolers experience due to the pendulum swing of their fleshly activities. So I'm going to give you another story about my older son's art interest and a token freedom of choice. This is another principle that you want to wrap your mind around, okay? By the time that our oldest child was in 4th grade, I noticed a decline of interest toward a primary interest of his life since he was just 2 years old, and that was drawing. He was quite the artist, and he was content to sit for hours in his own company just learning how to draw faces. And beginning young as he did, by the time he was 7, his faces of real people were becoming recognizable. He would copy the illustrations of the presidents, Washington, Lincoln, even Ben Franklin. Those were his favorites, and he got really good at drawing those faces. But I was so sad to see him move away from this budding talent to instead only pursue those activities that his friends at school were doing, mostly sports. Not that there was anything wrong with that, it's just that it seemed like he turned off to his own talent. And in school, the teachers encouraged only token activities in the arts. And our son even won art contests for his drawings, but by 4th grade, he had a teacher who wasn't interested in art and therefore didn't encourage it. And I remember trying to get my son's heart ignited again toward art. And so I took him to a mall, to a special art exhibit of Norman Rockwell's paintings. And my son had a book of his paintings and used to like looking it over. He really enjoyed going with me to the exhibit, but he never really caught on to his art again after that, not until years later. It seemed that the years of being held to a strict time clock, fulfilling these teacher-generated assignments that overlooked who he was and what he was really good at doing, served to reduce his real talent down to a moment of fun when he was allowed to have a token freedom of choice on occasion. So art and drawing had been a vital interest for him for 8 years, but his soul became disappointed and discouraged from pursuing it any further, and his talent had been reduced down to just a nice little extra thing, a moment of fun. And this was the beginning to his loss of personal identity, and it contributed to his independent ways and his lifestyle for years to come, always searching for himself. So you might believe that it's a good thing for kids to be independent so they can find themselves, and so you encourage them away from you more and more during their formative years. This is not a good thing. Parents, it is so not a good thing. Following this idea actually leads them into individualism, and that's our culture's counterfeit for God's beautiful plan for true individuality. And sadly, it leads to at least a partial loss of identity, if not complete lostness. And this lostness is caused by real actions that parents are taking in the name of doing good for their children. So you see, when you encourage individualism and you think you're encouraging independence, okay? You think you're encouraging independence. Children grow the best in community life. They grow into their true identity when grace and love are present. They grow into expressing who they truly are. They come to know who they truly are only in a healthy community, relational community. And that must begin in the family. It doesn't happen at school. You know that for a fact. Peer groups are not a replacement for family. You need a healthy family identity. And what you have in a peer group are lost children looking for their identity, and they have to make it up as they go along. They're in individualism, not in individuality. Individualism is forming in them, not true individuality. Okay, and so that's why I said it's the lostness can be just a partial lostness of identity. Sometimes it's a complete lostness of identity, true identity. And it's caused by real actions parents are making in the name of doing good for their children. You know, children need to get away from a token freedom of choice over their activities. They need to delve completely in to something that grabs their heart's attention, like my son's art did. He needed to have much more time on that interest than was given him through a token moment of choice that he had. You see, he needed to be able to develop his art more fully. Then he would have been able to find himself more fully. He would have been able to find the vocation that suited him more aptly, you see. And that's just one interest. I mean, he went to school his whole life, and so there were many things that he never actually was able to discover. When the children are given that environment to discover who they really are and what's in them to do, they end up with all sorts of interests. It's really sad to see how many people are robbed of that opportunity. I was robbed of that opportunity. You might have been as well. If you've been unable to relate with God on His terms, out of the abundance coming from your own heart, you have to create a nice looking on the surface model of whatever body of truths you're trying to get into your family's life around your own terms, serving a God of your own making. Simple solutions to simple ideas. So the model most prevalent among homeschooling circles is what legalists offer you, a rigid version of the flesh expression to curriculum, and it will only shower death on all of your relationships and on your family's discipling efforts, on your family's educating processes as well, robbing the life right out of God's precious children. And so I ask you, could your artificially generated assignments be at fault for robbing your children of personal identity? Absolutely they can. Could this be a reason for why they feel misunderstood by you and you sense that you may be losing their hearts? Absolutely it can. When you come to know that you need to find a better way to educate and reach your children's hearts, the typical response is to swing in the opposite direction toward more license in the hope of getting the response that you want from your children. And this can look like exploring unschooling ideas, but you're uneasy about that, and for good reason. However, you may try on some ideas to experiment, but you find that doesn't work either, because life just keeps getting more and more out of control, and you find that you're actually trapped on the pendulum swing of fleshly ways. And it's really time to get off that swing and turn some worrisome dynamics around in your family. And when you get into the vital sign learning indicators, you may be surprised, because remember, reality is not as you might suppose. There are 3 possible expressions of each vital sign. Consider that: the real, the rival, and the counterfeit. Yes, and that's why I have a message on each one that expands a discussion for each vital sign. And of course, one is rigid legalistic rival, and then there's the licentious counterfeit. And the third one, of course, is that it's walked out by the Spirit in God's grace through relational processes. And so, whichever way the flesh turns, it will produce death in its efforts, because that's what the flesh does. It sabotages truth. And the vital signs of learning are no exception. As long as the flesh is in control, it will sabotage truth at every turn, breathing death on what is already living. This is what's so sad, because the life-giving principles are already inborn in our children. Individuality is already a part of them. They're already unique, one-of-a-kind, distinct individuals. They already are that. You see, that's how God created them. They already have the capacity for self-government because God gave them a conscience. That's what you need to be training. Relate with the makeup of how God created us to operate. You see, relate with that. That's one of the vital signs, life-related. You relate with what's already there instead of bringing this big old batch of difficult, laborious, extra work on your life that you don't need and your children don't need, completely forfeiting and robbing your children of the true life that's already there, and then putting it to death even more and more, increasingly sabotaging the real life that God already gave them. Remember how I had to teach the principle of individuality to my children through pre-written curriculum and assignments. This activity never actually had the hope of forming individuality in my children. And I didn't yet know about the vital signs that support the formation of individuality, and I wasn't yet aware of a way to test my efforts toward a whole life education. I simply needed more understanding of what seemed to be vital activity that produced the results I wanted to see in my children. The vital signs would help me to test the fruit of their growth and their learning activities, but it would be a couple more years through a transformative change in me before I had that inspiration. In the meantime, experimenting with my children while a dead effort for their growth and learning was quite an education for me. And if it wasn't for how God had been working in my heart, changing me and my thinking as I submitted to obeying Him the best that I knew how at that time, I never would have come into His love and grace. Never would have. I eventually did come to understand how to capably, wisely, and successfully form true individuality in my children, and all my dead efforts faded into memory while God miraculously redeemed the time for my children, and He used my experimentations to further my own education and to help shape my future ministry message through wisdom's way of learning. So do you wonder about your fruit? Do you wonder about it? Do you wonder about what you're supposed to do about it? Yes, that is something to wonder about. So let me ask you. Well, here, I've got some questions for you to ponder. Do you wonder why your children can't seem to sustain an interest in anything for very long, especially if it requires any self-discipline? Do you wonder? Do you wonder why they can't seem to connect in practical ways to your discipling efforts and their need for personal growth and moving their life forward? Why would they be able to do that if you've never engaged in relational processes with them? You see, why would they be able to do that? Do you wonder why they seem to be lacking in immediate daily purpose, or even just in common sense? Well, why wouldn't they be lacking in immediate daily purpose if they've never been given more than a token choice? You see, while they're spending their whole life jumping through the hoops of someone else's ideas of what they should be doing. You see? Do you wonder why your children waste further learning opportunities, not wanting to continue learning the subjects on their own? They've never engaged in the processes of learning, true learning, so why wouldn't they? Why would they be able to further learning opportunities? Do you ever wonder why their inner drive seems to be selective? That's easy. Their inner drive is trying to escape all the artificial dead requirements that have been placed on their life, their whole life, you see? So of course their inner drive is selective. It's going to take them away from anything that's remotely related to learning, you see? Do you wonder why they waste their free time or seem a bit aimless? They've never had to engage with real life very much, so of course they're aimless. They don't know how to do real life. They need to be shown how, you see? If you have older kids, have you wondered why they grew up to become more independent than you ever wanted them to be? Parents want children to be independent in that they want them to be responsible, but they don't want them cut off from family. You see? Are they still searching or floundering in their purpose? Do they know where this fruit is coming from? Do you know where the fruit of your older children is coming from? I know that you don't want to oppose God's work in your life, or you wouldn't be listening to me, but I ask you, could you be in danger of making it all up? Or are you just recently free of those processes of making it all up? Playing at education and playing at parenting and playing at discipling. You know, playing house, playing church, playing school. So here's how you might be sabotaging true individuality from forming with opposing ideas of what reality is supposed to look like. Now, the activities listed below that I'm going to be describing to you will produce the bad fruit that I just described. And these activities may be producing some of your fruit as well. So do you allow your children a token freedom of choice in their educational process? Do you create a false reality with curriculum packages for teaching toward a broad knowledge base to prepare your children for a future unknown reality, thinking they may need it sometime? Do you contrive many learning activities for your children to demonstrate a show of learning, believing that your children are busy doing the work of learning, when in effect they're not really busy learning at all? Do you contrive complex projects for your children to make, but that are meaningless to them? Are you proud of your mom-generated assignments that produce a visible product? Do you train your children to be willingly compliant? Do you hold your children to a strict time clock for learning their required subjects? Have you pressed your children into the mold of conformity and false expectations, thinking that you're doing what is best for them? Can you imagine? Oh, Lord. Now, you may have assumed that what I've described here is sound and that it is reality simply because everyone takes these sorts of actions. However, every one of these false educational activities support the negative extreme traits of the flesh of conformism and individualism toward a loss of personal identity and immediate purpose. Immediate purpose, not some future off in the distance purpose, but purpose right now. And so what results is DIP, delayed identity and purpose. That's what results. Delayed identity and purpose. The formation of your children's identity and purpose is delayed so they can be put through the rigorous years of a general education that was designed for the cloned messes. Children then have to grow up to wander around trying to figure things out on their own. Some do, some don't. Instead, they can be empowered toward immediate purpose, which will form true identity in them and the unfolding of future purpose. Oh my, false realities and the actions taken to support them do not support the formation of true individuality. If any part of my description of a false reality is familiar to your experience, then you may be asking, if this isn't reality, then what is? The answer is that God is the one who created his reality to work a certain way. He has the answers, and you have to be receiving his correction, his instruction, and his direction to your own conscience in order to get the answers. True reality is something that you could not have guessed, just like C.S. Lewis said. Highly respected Christian influencer of the 50s, 60s, 70s. You remember C.S. Lewis? True reality is something you could not have guessed, and it flows out of a whole relational environment. Do you know C.S. Lewis came to that understanding after he had a loving relationship for the first time in his life? Interesting. Anything less than this is simply made up out of man's need to serve his own ideas in his own ways. Can you now see where some of your fruit is coming from? Can you see where it's coming from? And this is my closing here. God isn't out to confuse us. But with that said, spiritual truths aren't something God invented to confuse us religious folk or otherwise keep us in the dark. He doesn't intentionally keep us from truth. In fact, God says that to have knowledge of him, we are to seek him with our whole heart. And so you must address your divided heart, or you won't be able to apprehend the true expressions of the vital signs for your children. You won't be able to apprehend truth and reality correctly with a divided heart. You have to decide who you are serving. Who are you serving? Your own fear? That's serving the devil. Cultural, man-made ideas? You're serving the fear of man. Where is the fear of God in your life? Are you willing to serve him? We must address our divided hearts. Not because God won't let you into the truth, but because a divided heart will actually stop up your searching process. If you're so busy jumping through the hoops of serving cultural expectations, you're not seeking God for hundreds of needs that your family actually has. You're turned off to it. You're not available for the searching process. You'll be drawn away by the lust of your own fleshly ways, which takes you off course and gives you a wrong perception of God and his ways. A divided heart prevents you from connecting to your own inner growth process where God is trying to get your attention. And the reason you can't connect in is because you're focused on false standards for how to live life and get an education and even how to live the Christian life, compromising your own conscience with every decision you make. And God's finding me system, it works. It works in such a way that only those who search with a single-minded heart will actually lay hold of him in reality. So I know, and that just means surrender. That's what that means. I know that you've been very serious about the way you've been serving education. I was very serious. But have you been shaping your value system in opposition to God's wonderful ways of truth that prevent true individuality from forming? Do you know if you've actually been serving your children's true needs? If you have experienced conviction through this message, I want to give you hope as well. Many moms have been helped in turning things around in their family relationships when changing the way they pursue the activities of education and discipleship. And so I'd like to help you to change your misdirected focus too. Okay, and so I'm going to be going into I'll go into the vital signs more, and then also the learning tools more. Now, I know that I have covered these in the Homeschooling Challenge programs. I thought that perhaps I would take it a different way. Instead of just teaching those principles like you can read in the book, I thought it would be more fun for you if I go through one of these books. These were part of Wisdom's Way of Learning at the beginning, and I separated them out so they stand alone. Each one stands alone. I can talk to you about my journey in search for the way. I can share the examples of my kids' main and teach the principles, the vital sign principles through these project examples, through Catherine's Bird Book or through John's record of projects. I could do both. I could do all three. I'm not sure yet which way I'm going to go, but if you would put your requests there, I could do all three of them. There's no deadline to the series. I could do all three of them. I can do one each week. These don't have to be 2 hours long. This is an hour and 45 minutes, so I'm going to need to get off here. But I want to use a different content for teaching you some of the vital sign principles, okay? I know that the Lord is wanting to invite you into a process that is living and will produce the fruit that you want, that your heart's desire wants to see in your children's lives. And I know that some of you might have things to recover in your family relationships. Do you know that if all you did was focus on that, you would get light years ahead? Okay? So we can go through some of this other material that can help inspire, and maybe even have your children look at it as well to help inspire them. Because when children love to learn and they get to do something that they're very interested in doing, their interest perks up, and it starts to overlap into lots of areas of interest. And you can't predict where it will go. You can't predict it like a curriculum. You can't pre-plan it. You plan projects as their interests roll along. That's what I did. I planned the Bird Book project with Catherine. I planned the Record of Books project for John. He was only 10 at the time, and he needed me to plan it. With Catherine's Bird Book, I didn't know what all she knew about birds, and so she helped me create the contents, what the Bird Book would hold. And so I planned the project for her, got it organized based on what she showed me she had. And so I planned those projects, but it wasn't a year in advance. It was for the next 3-month, 4-month period of time. I planned a 3-month period of time, and then another 3-month period of time as we approached it. What is a good project for the learning tools to be exercised in? You see, I wanted the learning tools developed in my children. So anyway, we can go into that next time. And if you have any questions at all about the chapters in Wisdom's Way of Learning, having to do with natural learning, having to do with the vital signs, having to do with don't get into the structures yet, because the the 3-stage learning process and the lifestyle learning framework, because I'm saving that till the last. I want you to get all the pieces of learning first, and then I'll show you how they fit together later on in a later session. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Can teaching the fruits of the Spirit be a good starting point in teaching character? Yes, of course it can. Allowing them to contribute to the discussion on different ways we can show that fruit depending on their ages, 9 or 9 and under. Present these concepts so they're aware. Well, of course they can. I did that. Also did that through formal curriculum when I presented the idea of God's standard, God's moral law of love. And we addressed some of the fruit of the Spirit at that time. That's another formality that wasn't necessary. I took that into their child training on a daily basis, just as I did with self-government. So, and then the individuality was formed in them through doing, letting them engage with their real life, and then bringing their real life to the table for the application of learning tools. That's how I did that, developed their learning tools through their real life interests. Yes, so there's many ways to teach character, but you want it to be in the flow of real life need. I know it was deep, I know it was rich, and hopefully inspiring, and that you got clarity for what's right, what's wrong, what does God want to do, what does he want to lead you to do. And I hope that there was plenty of clarity in this message so that you could begin to chuck the unfruitful works of the flesh and really focus in on productivity in your family, the character training, the relational training, the developing interests and skills. When you focus on relational training, you're not going wrong with the delight-directed learning process. If you leave off the relational training, that delight-directed learning process that you think you're allowing is going to become individualism. It's going to become, I'm only interested in my life and what I'm doing and where I'm going, instead of interested in what everyone is doing and contributing to one another's processes or projects, like a healthy relational dynamic is going to do. Children are going to care about what each one in the family is doing and offer assistance when needed, because everyone has something different to offer, different skills, different ideas, you see. And that's how individuality is acknowledged. Individual contributions are received, and individual traits are brought out, and children learn to appreciate one another's contributions to the family and to their own processes of learning and growth, you see. So there's so much to do in your own family, you see, when you're engaged in relational processes, and all of it is relational. The education, the scholarship, the discipleship, all of it is relational. Remember, you are learning how to get a healthy mode of interaction between one person and their entire world. A healthy mode of interaction, and that alone gives you lots of training ground, dear mom. Just remember that. Dear hearts, train your children relationally. And if you don't know how to do that, then you are not surrendered to the Lord. Begin with what you understand, begin with what you know, and move on from there. Because you have a measure of surrender to the Lord in your life, and he will continue to lead you and guide you in more and more surrender, so that you have more and more life to give your precious children. Amen. Yes, thank you, Lord. Well, I have been on long enough, and I am going to let you go, ladies. I pray for tremendous burst of insight. I pray for epiphanies for each one of you watching this, an epiphany, a burst of insight into your precious children and into the truths that you want them to know and understand. And I pray that the tangle of false and fleshly ways just begins to unravel and fall off of your soul, that you come into the freedom wherewith Christ has made you free. Amen. Thank you, Jesus. Don't you go and remember to love on those precious kiddos of yours today, because they are so very dear to the Lord, and validate to them the things the Lord is showing you. Help them to know that you've been thinking about them and what is the best for them and what God is showing you about them, and you will turn their hearts to you in a jiff. They will turn to you. So let them know what God is showing you about them. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Bye-bye, ladies.